It's June 6, 1944. Dawn breaks over the English Channel. For 3 long years, Adolf Hitler's ruthless war machine has terrorized Europe. But today, the tide is about to turn. Under cover of darkness, the Allied armies have prepared one of the most daring military operations in history. In a few hours, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, sailors, and airmen will put their lives on the line to liberate Nazi-occupied France. This is the story of D-Day. The Normandy Invasion. Part 1. The Road to D-Day. After the stunningly swift collapse of France in 1940, Nazi Germany dominated Western Europe. Only Britain, heavily bombed by the Luftwaffe and threatened by U-boat packs, stood between the British Empire and a German takeover of the continent. As Winston Churchill desperately sought a way to end the stalemate, the Soviet Union, which had entered the war in June, pleaded for help. On June 22, 1941, Hitler launched his massive assault on the USSR, codenamed Operation Overlord. Within weeks, millions of Soviets were dead or imprisoned. But still, Stalin urged his beleaguered ally to open a second front in Western Europe. And so, in 1942 and 1943, the British and Americans tested their forces against the Italians in North Africa, Sicily, and mainland Italy. They fought in amphibious assaults and gained experience in battling well-fortified defenses. Most importantly, they proved that they could mount massive logistical operations across the Mediterranean. Meanwhile, Hitler spent billions of euros turning Europe's western coastline into a fortress, stretching from Norway to Spain. It was known as the Atlantic Wall, but nowhere was more heavily defended than France. If the Allies really were planning to invade, the obvious target was the narrowest point between Britain and France, the 21 miles between Dover and Calais. Yet, ironically, the supreme commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, knew that this heavily fortified region would be the last place the Germans expected an invasion. In March 1943, Eisenhower met with British and Canadian leaders to choose a site in the thinly defended region of Normandy. There, the beaches were codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. But choosing a date was far trickier. Storms in the winter of 1943 made amphibious operations impossible. And the longer the Allies waited, the better prepared the Germans would become. Finally, with the weather improving, Eisenhower set the invasion for May 1944. But bad weather forced the postponement until June. And on the night of June 5th, 150,000 men prepared to cross the English Channel. Part 2. Planning Operation Overlord. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Dwight D. Eisenhower was calm, even serene. He exuded confidence and seemed to age during the war. He understood that Operation Overlord, the invasion of France, depended on a delicate balance between the competing personalities and national interests of the 3 allied nations. The British wanted a broad front strategy involving all 3 of their allies. But this would spread their resources too thin, and the Americans, eager to prove themselves, insisted on going it alone. Eisenhower ultimately sided with British General Bernard Montgomery, who had insisted on focusing the invasion on one narrow front, but insisted that Montgomery keep a low profile. He didn't want the general regarded as the hero of the invasion, while he himself became a footnote in history. Under Eisenhower's overall command, General Frederick Morgan planned the military details. He had only 3 months to train and prepare 3 million soldiers, 10,000 vehicles, and an entire new supply and communication system. No such undertaking had ever been mounted before. It would require an army 1/3 the size of the entire population of the United States. To pull off this massive operation, a deception campaign codenamed Operation Bodyguard was The British commander, Lord Craigie, was in charge of building elaborate fake headquarters and moving duplicate signals intelligence equipment to other locations. They planted phony radio communications and dispatched inflatable rubber tanks to the French countryside. False aerial photographs were sent to Berlin. A whole fake army, complete with double agents, was created to convince the Germans that the real invasion would be at Pied de Calais. The mastermind of the deception was Major General Samuel V. Wilson, who ran the 1st Special Service Force. This elite unit consisted of 2 Canadian and 2 U.S. regiments, trained in sabotage, demolition, and espionage. Their primary mission was to confuse the Germans. Part of their job was to simulate the buildup of Allied forces in Belgium and southern England. 4 weeks, the FSF transported inflatable tanks to pre-selected drop zones and left them there like discarded balloons. Then they observed German reactions from hidden locations. To make things more realistic, they used small charges to blow holes in the sides of buildings. When the actual Allied buildup did occur in Normandy, the Germans never caught on. Part 3, the airborne assault. The invasion began before dawn on June 6, 1944, when thousands of paratroopers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions dropped behind enemy lines. British and Canadian paratroopers followed soon after. Their mission: secure bridges, destroy artillery positions, and disrupt German reinforcements. As Allied paratroopers descended toward the Normandy coast, people watched from nearby ships. There were no planes flying overhead, no sound of engines. All they heard was the wind, the waves, and the soft thud of parachutes descending toward the French coastline. But the night jump was far from textbook. Bad weather, heavy anti-aircraft fire, and poor navigation scattered units across Normandy. Isolated groups of exhausted paratroopers found themselves far from their intended landing zones, weapons and ammunition low. Quickly, they fell back on improvisation and initiative. Fighting through the night, they linked up with local French resistance fighters who guided them to safety. By the time the sun came up, the Allied paratroopers had secured key roads and bridges. Despite confusion, they had achieved their most important objective, holding back the Germans from the beaches. Part 4. The landings. At 6:30 a.m., the first wave of assault troops hit the beaches. On Utah Beach, the Americans were pushed off course by strong currents and ended up on the far eastern flank of the invasion, where luckily casualties were relatively light and the beach was secured quickly. Next door, on Omaha Beach, the situation was very different. The defenders, part of the elite German 352nd Division, were well-trained and well-equipped. They opened fire with machine guns, cutting down the first waves of Americans. Artillery and obstacles strewn across the sand also took their toll. By mid-morning, chaos reigned. Survivors ran for cover, taking heavy casualties. But small groups of soldiers pushed forward, scaling cliffs and racing across open fields. They overran and destroyed pillboxes and bunkers. By nightfall, Omaha was secured, but at the cost of over 2,000 dead and wounded. Meanwhile, British troops landed on Gold Beach and quickly advanced inland, capturing key villages and linking up with airborne units. The Canadians came ashore on Juno Beach, facing fierce resistance, but despite heavy casualties, they managed to advance farther inland than any other Allied force. Finally, British troops landed on Sword Beach. They were soon joined by French commandos, led by Philippe Kiefer. Their mission: push toward Caen, though the city would not fall for weeks. Part 5. The German response. In his headquarters at Wolf's Lair in East Prussia, Hitler kept tight control over his panzer divisions. Throughout the morning of June 6th, he received reports that Allied air forces were bombing railroads, bridges, and convoys across France. But to him, these were merely diversions. His generals, equally confused, hesitated, unsure whether Normandy was the real invasion or just another ruse to divert their attention from the real attack, which he believed would be in the Pied-de-Calais region. Only one man saw what was happening in Normandy. The German general, Desert Fox, was away visiting his wife in Germany and unavailable for consultation. When he finally got to his command post at 3 p.m., his staff told him there was nothing to worry about. Rommel himself had warned that the Allies must be defeated on the beaches. But on June 6th, he was on a train traveling to Paris. As Allied troops tightened their grip on the beachhead, Hitler finally ordered the German counterattack, but it was too late. Allied air superiority slowed them down. Bombers and fighters relentlessly attacked German columns. The offensive sputtered and stalled. Unable to break through the Allied lines, Hitler ordered another attack for June 7th, but this time with his elite SS Panzer units. Again, Allied air power thwarted the attempt. Exhausted and demoralized, the Germans never got a chance to regroup. Part 6, the cost of victory. By the end of D-Day, the Allies had landed over 156,000 troops, 11,000 aircraft, and nearly 7,000 ships. Casualties were staggering. Around 10,000 Allied soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing. German losses were similar, and thousands of French civilians also died in the bombardments, but the beachhead was secure. The Western Front was open. Over the following weeks, fierce battles raged across Normandy. The Allies struggled through the Bocage countryside, the flatlands between hedges, then captured the vital port of By late July, they broke out of Normandy at Saint-Lay and raced toward Paris, liberating the city on August 25th. D-Day was more than a military operation. It was a turning point in world history. The courage of those who landed on the beaches, the pilots who filled the skies, and the sailors who crossed the channel paved the way for the defeat of Nazi tyranny. Today, the Normandy coast is a place of quiet remembrance. The white crosses and stars of David in cemeteries stand as eternal witnesses to the price of freedom. June 6, 1944 will forever be remembered as the day hope returned to a darkened continent.